Okay, we're back, and I am at a decision point on plastering the pool. There are two options, essentially. I can do it myself, or I can pay someone else to do it. Up until now, I have been on the DIY train, and as much as possible, I like to be on that train because it's usually a lot cheaper than the other train. So there's a couple considerations to take into account in both ways. Really, hiring someone else to do it, there's only a couple of things. Is how much is it going to cost? It's really expensive, no matter who you do it with. The other issue is how long it's going to take them, and are they any good? Those are two really separate factors for a different video. I don't have any tips for knowing whether a contractor is good or bad, or whether their prices are good or bad. But I can tell you one way I've discovered to on finding what I think is maybe a good contractor is I found some bad ones, all the way from a typical pool replastering like this. This is about somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet. I think it's a little on the lower end of that. Most of the estimates, the averages and believable estimates, were around the $12,000, $13,000, $15,000, and so that's kind of the range of expectations. I got a quote for $60,000 as well. That only included the plaster. It didn't include any tile or anything else. To me, that was a quote that was basically just saying, we don't want to do that, but if you pay us an insane amount of money, we'll talk to you. And so I rejected that outright. That was insane. And if that's what it really did cost, I'd be doing this all myself easily. So I got another quote, which was also a little high. It was about $35,000 just for the plaster, not the tile, not for anything else, just plaster. And he was about a year out. It's a professional company that, you know, does this stuff for a living. They were a year out, and in addition to that, they only had appointments to come look at the pool to give me an estimate in November, and right now it's August. So you can do the math there. They won't even look at it until then, and then they might be able to give me a quote, and then it's probably in the range of $35,000. So that is also unacceptable in my case. Some people might have that, but if it was $35,000, I'd be doing the other option that I'll talk about now. Is that for $2,000, let me start here. Replastering the pool, you have to prepare. There's a few things. You have to prepare the pool, and then you have to buy all the materials and equipment and skill and do all the labor to apply it. And so one of the things you need to do is, that I have already done, as you can see, is I have chipped out all of the plaster over the entire pool. Well, a pool like this, or a gunite pool, has a concrete shell, and then the concrete is not waterproof. It will slowly weep water through it over time. And on top of the concrete, they put a waterproof, they call it plaster. And so that's what all this white stuff is. And you can see on the steps, it's a little bit more, you can see more of the concrete or the gunite. It's just a shotcrete, whatever you call it. And so one of the things I have found, other than fixing cracks that you want to do like I did in my other video, there is a small defect over here, as you can see, is that there are some, they call them little wire ties, and what those are is little wires that have tied the rebar that is in the shell together to keep it from moving before they shoot the gunite. And there is 1, 2, 3, and there's a couple other spots over there where this iron, just a steel wire is showing through. And so if that stuff has to be removed before they put new plaster on, because that rust, when this stuff starts rusting, it can weep through the plaster and cause a bunch of stains, and it's really ugly. So I am going to grind that out, and then, not very deep, but patch it with some hydraulic cement, just to make sure those, it's like 5 or 6 spots, don't show up again. In fact, I just see one here too. Oh no, that looks like that might be bird poop. Gross. Okay, so next step. All right, so let's say you've decided you're gonna plaster your pool, and you've done all the work to prepare the shell, either chipped out all the plaster or you've made repairs and patched and things. and you got your wire ties ground out, there's no iron or steel or anything visible or that can come through the plaster when it's done. Next step is, how much does plaster cost? For this size pool, like I mentioned, it was somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet. I did the calculation from a company that would ship me diamondbrite plain. It's I don't remember the exact color, but it's most of the diamondbrite is mostly white. They have some, it's a quartz aggregate that I could get shipped to me by freight. It was somewhere around $3,500 to $4,000. I think it was closer to the 35, maybe it's 36, something like that. So that's a big chunk of money, but still, for quotes and estimates in the range of $12,000–$15,000, it's a pretty big difference, right? And so that's something to consider. The other thing you need to do is, before you apply the plaster, that you need to apply what they call a bond coat, which is essentially a I actually don't know what it is, but it makes the plaster adhere to the concrete much better. And it's especially required when you don't have when you have not removed all the plaster off of the gunite shell. You really want to apply this bond coat. I think it may be an acrylic base, so it just bonds to the old material much better. And you have to, once you apply that bond coat, I don't know how much it costs. It's not very much, and it's not very thick. I think you paint it on or you trowel it on in a very thin thickness. That doesn't make sense, but you apply it all over the plaster, you let it dry, and you have to plaster within, I don't know if it's within a couple weeks to a month. So there's a time frame that you have to have finished by, and so that's a little cost. I think it was only in the range of $400 or $500 for the material that I need to do this pool. So that gets me into the $4,000, maybe $4,200 range. The other consideration, the other thing you need, in my case, I need tile. And so I think I have, I counted, I needed just over 200 6-inch tiles in order to go around the perimeter of the pool. I'll go look up the prices, and I'll actually post them on the video as I'm talking about here. But I think it was in the range of $700 or $800. That's just for the tile, and then you have to consider the mortar and the Thinset and the grout and that kind of stuff. I don't think it's all, those are not as significant as the plaster and the bond coat. But the other thing you got to consider is, how do you get the plaster on the pool? And this is where it gets really tricky. The plaster is designed to be applied within a certain amount of time, meaning that once it's mixed, it has to be applied and troweled enough, but not too much, in a certain amount of time, and then you have to get the water in the pool, or you have to get the plaster in water or submerged within that time frame, not too soon, but also not too late, in order to have the longevity that it's designed to have. And so that dictates how long you can take to put this plaster on. There's some coatings, and I think there are epoxy coatings and different things that you can put on, that you can roll on with a paintbrush or a roller, and you take 2-3 days if you wanted to. You do it, and they say you're not supposed to, but I've seen videos of people on YouTube that have done it, and it seems to work out okay. But they'll do a section at a time, and you just paintbrush it on the coating on the pool, let it dry, and then you fill it up. And there's no time limit after painting and putting the coating on between then and when you have to fill it up with water. Plaster is different. When you're getting the plaster in, you can mix it by hand. What you've seen those guys on YouTube do, they'll get a big giant garbage can, 55-gallon, maybe it's even 60 or 70-gallon powder, the aggregate, the water, they'll mix it up with a giant, mixer. It's not just a drill with a little paddle on it. And, there's an actual big enough mixer to mix 55 gallons of cement, essentially, in one go. So there's some money involved in getting or renting a mixer like that in the bucket. And what they'll do is they'll dip 5-gallon Home Depot buckets of plaster, they'll walk it down in there, and they'll dump it on the bottom of the transition between the wall and the floor, and then the troweler will get that material and they'll spread it up from the bottom all the way up to the top, and they'll start working it, and there'll be 4, 5, 6 guys doing all that for a solid hour or two. And so I don't have 5 or 6 guys. I've got you know, my wife and my 2 kids. They're great, but none of us have had any experience doing plaster. If this was a smaller pool, I think I could do it and I would take it on, but it's just big enough that I don't know that I have the manpower and the skill to do it quickly enough. And so that's the other consideration. If you're going to mix it by hand, you really need a bunch of people that are experienced and have the equipment to do it. There's trowels and all that stuff's easy to get. Spiked shoes, that way you can walk around on the plaster. And so that's if you're doing it yourself. The other way you can do it, if you don't have quite as many people, but maybe you got a little bit more cash, and there's a crow. So your other option, if you're not going to mix it by hand, is you can get a plaster pump, is essentially like a sprayer and a concrete mixer combined. So you dump up the bags of aggregate or plaster in the machine, and you hook up a water hose, and it mixes the plaster and sprays it out a pipe, a long hose. And you can watch videos of guys spraying that along the wall and then someone else following it up with a trowel. So I think you can get away with a few less people, but the cost to either buy that equipment, buying the pump's really expensive. It's like $5,000 or $6,000. I've heard you can rent them, and I talked to the company that makes them, and there's some places that will rent them and even drop ship them to you. I didn't look into how much that cost just yet because I didn't get quite that far, but I'd imagine it's, you probably rent it for a few days to a week, and then you got to figure out how to ship it back, that kind of stuff. And so probably $500 or $600 on top of all the other stuff you bought, and then you still have to know somewhat how to trowel plaster. And so that's really the hard thing that really convinced me to pay someone to do it, given the cost and the skill levels. That the plaster, once it's mixed, you can't it has to be applied within a certain time frame before it hardens up, obviously. And once you get it in and you get it on the wall, is you can't over trowel it. You have to wait a bit for it to start setting up, and then you can trowel it, and then the troweling helps bring some of the water out of the mixture and helps it dry and evaporate. But if you over trowel it, that can cause problems later with calcium. I forget the fancy names for the stuff that's in the plaster, can kind of leach out and cause staining over time if it's not troweled enough or it's troweled too much. The other problem is that if it starts hardening up on you, you can't add more water to it to get it to be thin again, so you can trowel it easier, because that causes more of the same calcium leaching out and stuff later. And so it's really this fine line of having enough people and having them skilled enough to be able to apply it in the time frame that it needs to really go on. And so that's ultimately why I chose to hire someone else to do it. And so one of the things I found in finding that's the other issue, is finding someone to do it, is I had, I think, a total of 7 or 8 different companies and people bidding, on giving me estimates on how to do this. Some of them, would come and give me, they came and take a look and said they'd give me an estimate, and then would never call back. I kept calling and saying, hey, can I get the estimate? When can you do this? And they, yeah, we'll call you back. You never hear from them. So I didn't trust those people, because if they can't even call me back before I've given them money, imagine after I've paid them and they haven't finished the job yet, how miserable that would be. I did find a guy that it looks like I'm in Tennessee and he works out of Florida, but it sounds like he does troweling or things like that. He gave me the best price on this easily. The trouble is he's in Florida and I'm not, and so handing someone and they all require a deposit. Usually it's 50% down and then the balance on when the job is done. It's really hard for me to just hand a guy a check for thousands of dollars and then he's in another state and I got no way to really keep tabs on him, or there's no place I can go to and nag him if he hasn't done my job yet, or if he's done something wrong, or if I need to sue him or something like that. So that wasn't maybe the best choice. But what I did find is I found a small pool supply shop. They do, they sell chemicals and test equipment and stuff like that. If you can find a small enough one that they aren't likely to have their own pool plaster refurbishing business, they know someone who does. And so I got a card from them, from this local place that said, we've used this guy in the past and he's, you know, and he's done a good job. And so he came out next day after I called him, came out, gave me a reasonable estimate. He answers my calls, you know, he does, or he answers my text messages, and, you know, gave me an actual estimate with, you know, company name and some details of what he was going to do. And so those are the things you want to find in a contract for someone who's going to do this. You know, if you're spending $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 replastering a pool or refurbishing a pool, you really want to get someone who's reliable. You don't just pick the cheapest one you can find, because you may not see him ever again after you've given him a check. And so those are all the considerations you need to be aware of if you're going to DIY plaster the pool or hire it out. Ultimately, I was really sad to I suppose I haven't actually signed a contract yet, so I may end up doing this myself eventually if the guy I think I'm hiring doesn't work out. But I'm pretty sure he's solid, so we're going to take that chance. But it would have been a really epic video to be able to do it myself, because I've never seen anyone on YouTube actually plaster their own pool. It would have been either epic success and really great video, or it would have been an epic failure and still would have been a good video. And so it just would have cost me a lot of money, and that wasn't I'm not willing to spend that much money on making an epic video. So hopefully you understand. There's still some stuff to do, and I'll probably try and take a time lapse of when the guys are here doing that. But ultimately what they're going to do is they're going to replaster the pool, they're going to install some new tile, and they're going to resurface my concrete deck. If that is interesting and you want to see how that works out, click the subscribe button, and we'll see you later.